I'm not really a number, maybe 8 or so. I mean, you're only like the 6th out there, but you got to be 30 miles to the guy in front of you. Delta 24, I want to change it slightly, make it a little easier. It's going to be Sierra Whiskey for 9 left. You're going to go pretty much just ahead of those 2 guys in front of you.
Alright, let's get those 2 guys in front of us. Whiskey right there.
Piedmont, 61, 65, runway 9 left, kilo 6, line up for wait turbulence.
That's left, kilo 6, line up for wait.
Hello again guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video it is the big one. We are today of course going to be taking a look at the PMDG 737. The aircraft will be releasing for the sim fairly imminently now if it hasn't done so already, and PMDG have been kind enough to let us take an early look so that we can carry out a review. So in today's video we are going to be taking a full review look at the product. For those of you who are new to the channel, that means we're going to carry out a full flight in the aircraft from a cold and dark startup all the way through to shutdown. After that we'll cover off a few more details, looking at the texturing and the modelling a little bit more closely. We'll look at any other features that are unique to the add-on, and then finally we'll finish up the review. I'll give you my breakdown on the product and my overall thoughts and opinions. PMDG are releasing the 700 variant of the 737 first, so that's the aircraft we're going to be taking on our flight today. We're currently on the ground at San Diego's International Airport, and we're going to be taking a flight over towards the east, heading in towards Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. It should be a nice quick hop. We'll be making our way up towards flight level 370, loading up 5.4 tons of fuel onto the aircraft. Anyway guys, this should be a good one. As always, if you do enjoy the video and find it to be of use, then please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. Let's now head for the cockpit of our newest and shiniest jet for the sim. So at long last we find ourselves in the cockpit of the PMDG 737. A very beautiful machine it is as well. We'll obviously talk more about that towards the end of the video. For now we're just going to crack on with the flight. We just got on board the aircraft. So far all we've done is turn the battery master on. We've fired up the APU, that's now on the bus. And we've got some bleed air going from the APU down towards the packs to put some nice cooling air into the cabin for the passengers. So we'll run through our pre-flight flows. So far we've got the aft left fuel pump on. We'll get the rest of the main fuel pumps on there as well. Centre tank fuel pumps are off. We've got no fuel there in the centre tank. Working our way up through the overhead, we'll leave the yaw damper off for now until the IRSs have aligned. And speaking of those, we can set those to nav. So just continuing up through the overhead, again the APU is currently on the bus. Power output looks good. Engine start selectors are both off. We'll go to left ignition for the start today. Fasten seatbelt signs can go on. We've already got all of our fuel on board the aircraft. We've got 5.4 tons as per the flight plan. Electric hydraulic pumps can go on in preparation for the walk around. Probe heats can stay off and the window heats can go on. Coming up to our pressurization panel, cruise flight level for our route today is flight level 370.
Alaska 328, left turn Bravo 8, all the way under Bravo please and contact ground today.
Bravo 8, Bravo over to ground, Alaska 320.
A little bit fiddly there on the click spot. We have 370 set. And landing altitude in Phoenix is going to be 1,130 feet, so we'll set 1,100. And we have 1,100 set. We're in auto. For the bleeds, we've got the packs on, isolation valve is in auto, engine bleeds are off for the time being, APU bleed is on. Temperature selectors are both in auto. And finishing up at the top of the overhead panel, most of the functionality there I believe is for maintenance purposes, so we'll say that's all been checked. Onto the main instrument panel, primary altimeters, we've got QNH 2992 set on both sides and on the standby. Auto brakes off, gear selector is down, we have 3 greens. For the EFIS control panel we'll stay with map 20 for the time being, we've got the VORs selected on both sides. Flight directors can go on, we'll take the left first so that my flight director is the master. Runway heading is 275, so we can set that now.
Wing 788, wind 210 at 10, runway 27, clear for takeoff.
27, we're clear for takeoff.
And we have 275 set. Initial cruise altitude is going to be 12,000 feet based off the SID. And we have 12,000 set. We can leave the course for the time being. Autopilot is off. And working our way down towards the pedestal. Speed brakes are retracted, flaps are retracted, throttles are idle. Engine masters are off. We'll carry out a quick fire test. Everything looking good there. Com radios we're not going to need for the flight today, so we'll leave those as is. Nav radios we can tune up later on. You'll notice that the weather radar is inoperative. We'll talk more about that towards the end of the video. Transponder is set with squawking 1200, currently in standby. Rudder trim is set neutral. And same on the first officer side, we're not going to need the com radio. Everything looking good. So we'll run through the pre-flight checklist. Parking brake is set, battery is on and guarded, standby power is on and guarded. Left half fuel pump is on, again we've got all 4 main fuel pumps on now. APU is on, that's on the bus, and the power output is checked. Position lights are set to steady, logo lights are off. Camera lights are set as required, emergency exit lights are armed. Passenger signs are on. Packs are set to auto. IRS mode selectors are both in nav, and we can now come down to the CDU and begin setting that up for our flight. So down at the CDU, first thing we'll do is hit FMC. We've already got some of our information in for the flight today, but we'll work our way through the whole process. So we are a 737-700 24K engine rating. The active nav database is valid. We'll go to POSINIT. Reference airport is San Diego, so Kilo Sierra Alpha November. Unfortunately the gates in the sim don't match up with the real world, so we'll just align based off the GPS position. So we'll go to next page, we'll align off the left GPS. We'll go back to the previous page and we'll set that in the set IRS position field, so the IRS is now aligning based off our GPS position. Next we'll go to route. As I said, already entered the origin there, so San Diego over towards Phoenix Sky Harbor, Kilo Sierra Alpha November, Kilo Papa Hotel X-Ray. Flight number today is Whiskey November 607, and we'll be departing off of runway 27. We'll go to the departures arrivals page. Departing out of San Diego, we've already got runway 27 pre-selected there as a result. Expecting the Zulu 2 departure, and it'll be the India Papa Lima transition. So back to the route page, we'll go to next. That takes us out towards India Papa Lima. From there it's going to be the Juliet 18 airway. That's out towards the Bravo Zulu Alpha VOR.
Zero Echo Bravo contact, SoCal departure, good day.
Switch into departure, 0 Echo Bravo, good day.
From there it's going to be direct to waypoint HOGS, which is Hotel Oscar Golf Golf Zulu. And then it'll be on towards waypoint Hydra. For the Hydra 1 arrival onto runway 08, we want the ILS. And there's the Hydra 1 for runway 08 with waypoint HOGS. We don't need any transition in the box today, so that's our route in. We'll just go to the legs page. We'll activate all of that and we'll hit execute. We'll just work our way briefly through the route, make sure everything looks correct. Usually of course we'd be more diligent, but just for the sake of brevity today. So we've got the Zoo 2 departure, that takes us out towards Zoo, and then on towards India Papa Lima, Bravo Zulu Alpha, then on towards Hydra.
Ground 725-72-10-2.
And that's bringing us in for the ILS runway 08. Next we'll go to Init Ref, we'll go to Index, and we can go to the performance page. So zero fuel weight for the flight today is 52.8 tonnes.
And I'm sorry, who's going ground?
Working in metric today, I'm afraid, for any American flyers amongst you. Unfortunately, my brain doesn't work in pounds. Fuel reserves. Our alternate is Kilo Papa Romeo Charlie, and for that we need 2.2 tonnes. And cost index for the flight is 20. Cruising altitude, as we said, flight level 370. Average cruise wind is going to be 338 at 10 knots.
572, I'm sorry, 4572 rate check.
Southwest 457, ground road, 275 Bravo.
Bravo 27, Southwest, 4572.
Top climb temperature we'll leave at minus 56 degrees, transition altitude is 18,000 feet. So we'll hit execute on all of that. Going to the M1 limit page, We'll go with a derate 2 for the takeoff, climb 2 for the departure. Next we'll go to takeoff. It's going to be a flaps 5 takeoff. And just heading towards the next page. Wind is 0.
Southwest 4572, information India, current advisement of India.
It's a dry runway, and the OAT is currently 15 degrees. CFG for the takeoff is 20.6. That gives us a stab trim of 6.31. We'll set that later on. And for our V speeds we have V1 126, VR 128, and V2 133. We'll set V2 plus 10 later on up in the speed window. For now, whilst we're down here, we'll brief the departure. So as we said, expecting the Zoo 2 departure off runway 27 here at San Diego. The plate for that is 10-3 Hotel. It's an RNAV SID. Tracking off runway heading 275 initially, making a left turn through waypoint Jetty. We've got a max 230 knot speed restriction as we come around the corner, and again below 12,000 feet initially for the departure. Tracking out towards the east, we've got to be above 14,000 feet at waypoint George. And ultimately tracking on towards the Imperial VOR, India Papa Lima. We'll tune up Imperial in just a moment's time, it's 115.9. In terms of the terrain, there is high terrain out to the east, we're tracking out towards it. MSA for the departure is 5,400 feet. Looks like the highest point on the terrain is 8,700 feet, but that's well out to the north. Otherwise, really nice day here, just a little bit of light cloud around, temperatures 15 degrees. Pretty much nil wind as we said, so we should be fine to go off runway 27. In terms of the taxi, we're currently at Terminal 1, so we'll be pushing back onto Bravo and then taking Bravo all the way down for a full-length departure off runway 27. Anyway, that's just about it for our preliminary cockpit setup. The passengers should now be coming onto the aircraft, so we'll wait until everybody's on board. Whilst we're waiting for that, we'll just take a quick stroll through the cabin, and I'll come back to you again once we are ready, more or less, for the push and start.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome aboard. Once you have located your seat, we ask you to please step out of the aisle. Cabin passengers behind you can pass you. This will expedite our boarding process. Your large carry-on items need to go in the overhead compartment. Your smaller ones underneath the seat in front of you.
Okay, so we now got all of our passengers on board. We've got the aircraft doors closed up. We'll run through the last of our pre-flight checks, so the transponder can go to TARA.
Password 22, number carry up.
On the MCP, we've got 143 set for the IAS, runway heading 275, initial altitude 12,000 feet. Yaw damper is on, window heats are on. Flight altitude for the pressurization, flight level 370 is set, landing altitude 1,100 feet. Flight directors are on. We've got LNAV armed up. Altimeter ref, we've got 2992 set on all three altimeters. Auto brake is set to RTO. Com radios, again, we're not going to need for the flight today, and the doors are closed. Tug just moving into position, so we'll take the park brake off in preparation for the push. Anti-collision light can go on. And again, we're going to be pushing back onto Bravo, which is just off the left wing here. You can just see the taxi line. Taking that all the way down to runway 27. Running through our before start checks. The fuel pumps, we've got all four main fuel pumps on. Again, the centre tank pumps are off. Electric hydraulic pumps are on. Anti-collision light is on. Parking brake is off. Ground equipment is clear. The tug just commencing the push, so we'll start the number one engine first. Secondary display unit is set to engine. Packs can go off.
2189, left turn and contact ground.
And as I say, starting the number one, so we'll put the engine start selector to ground.
Left turn, contact ground, Southwest 2189.
Start valve is open, and you can see we do have N2 rotation. We'll just wait until we see max motoring there before we introduce the fuel.
Password 22, number test.
Expecting to see the N2 peak around 23-25%. It's up through 25%. Fuel can go on. And just coming back onto Bravo, so we can stop the push. Park brake can go on. There's a Ryzen EGT, so we do have a good light off. We have N1 rotation. Expecting to see starter cut out fairly shortly.
Over 4572, contact local departure, good day.
Process 22.
All pressure looks good, fuel flow looks good. So just waiting for the number 1 to stabilise.
Over 1094, contact local departure, good day.
Good day, no, 1094.
There's starter cut out. Looks like the tug's clearing there off the nose. And we do have a good start there on the number 1, so we can start the number 2. Okay, so we do have 2 good starts running through our after start flows. The engine driven generators can go onto the bus. Probe heats can go on. Packs can go on. We'll get the Apu Bleed off. Engine bleeds can go on. Engine start selectors can go to continuous. And the engine driven generators, we'll just check the output there. Both looking good, so we can kill the APU. Running through our before taxi checks, generators 1 and 2 are both on. Probe heats are on. Wing anti-ice is off. Engine anti-ice is off. Packs are on. Isolation valve is set to auto. APU bleed is off. APU is off. Engine start switches are set to continuous. Flaps. This is going to be a flaps 5 takeoff as we discussed. And we have flaps 5 selected. Just waiting for the flaps to run out.
2707, left turn and contact ground.
Left turn, we'll call ground. Richard Flight 2707.
So just coming through flaps 2. We have leading edge extension. And we have flaps 5 indicated. Elevator trim. So we're looking for 6.31 units.
Ground clear flight 2707, clear to Bravo 8, we want to be
Going through flight 2707, number ground taxi to the ramp via Bravo.
to the ramp via Bravo, clear flight 2707.
And we have 6.31 set. Showing a message there, unable 230 knots at jetty. We can clear that for the time being. Flight controls, we can check. So coming onto the systems page, we have full up, full down, and neutral, full left, full right, and neutral, and on the rudder, full left, full right, and neutral. We'll get rid of the lower DU display, we'll hit recall, and nothing there for us. Taxi light can go on. Runway turn-off lights can go on as well. And we are clear for the taxi. We'll clear on the right side. We'll clear on the left. Park brake can come off. And looks like we need just a bit of thrust here to get the aircraft moving. And off we go. So as I say, we'll join left here onto Bravo. Just wait until we've got ourselves on the main taxiway. We can start carrying out the before takeoff checks. So taxi line straight off the nose, we'll join on to the main taxiway.
Southwest 1251, traffic passing behind you now, front here. They're going to go on gate 18. Behind them, push off gate 15 onto Bravo.
Clear to push on to Bravo behind Frontier, Southwest 1251.
As I said, now just straight ahead down to the threshold of runway 27 for a full length departure. So the before takeoff check, centre tank fuel pumps are off, not required. De-ice is off. Camera lights are set as required. Flight instruments are checked. Engine instruments are checked. Takeoff data. We have V1126, VR128, V2133 and 143 set there in the speed window. Nav equipment, so we did tune up the India Papa Lima VOR on both 1 and 2. We've got the Corsair set 073 on both sides.
3343, left turn your discretion and contact us.
We'll assume we have been given takeoff clearance, so landing lights can go on. And we'll set the strobe lights on as well.
Discretion over the ground, have a good one, Scott, 3343.
Taxi light can go off.
1251, runway 27, taxi Bravo, information to the Airline India.
Transponder is set to TARA. We'll select traffic on the nav display.
Alright, Bravo to 27, pick up EDS, that was 1251.
So we're pretty much all set and ready to go. We'll just continue our taxi here down towards the holding point, and then we'll be on our way. So we are nicely lined up here now on runway 27, pretty much all set. We can arm the auto throttle, start the clock, and we'll bring the throttles up. We'll let the engine stabilise around 40% N1. So the engines are stable, we'll hit toga, and we have N1 toga on the FMA. So thrust is set, that's checked. Just coming up on V1, the aircraft feels reasonable on the rudder. Coming back on the yoke. And pitching up to around 15 degrees. There's positive rate, we'll get the gear up. So just following the flight directors now, we have LNAV. Just trimming accordingly. Just going to manually hand fly the aircraft for a little bit here to see how it feels. We'll hold the after takeoff checks until we get the autopilot in. Yeah, so far on the takeoff, the aircraft felt pretty good. The rudder was a little bit twitchy initially. There's N1. You could see that as I was just coming up on the thrust and adjusting ourselves on the centre line, but it felt pretty good once we picked up a little bit of speed. So the thrust has come back to our climb power setting. We'll go into VNAV. We have VNAV speed. And overall, to hand fly the aircraft feels really good. It's pretty stable. Once you've got it trimmed, it more or less sits where you put it. Controls feel good. We'll try a little bit more manual flying later on. now the autopilot can go in. So we have command there on the FMA, just coming up through 180 knots, so we'll go flaps 1.
Royal 716, turn right, right turn heading 030, vectors on course.
Right turn 030, Airroyal 716.
And we can go flap 0. Start selectors can go off. Gear handle can go to the off position. And just coming up through 230 knots. Looks like VNAV's now taken us up to 250 knots as we come through the speed restriction there. So doing a good job so far. We're up through our 12,000 foot restriction as well, so we can set our cruising altitude now, flight level 370.
Royal 716, continue the right turn direct to Imperial and then on nav.
Direct to Imperial on nav, thanks, Airroyal 716.
So we have 370 sets, and we've got that there on the PFD. Aircraft just slightly overshooting the speed there, but it looks like our vertical speed is increasing there to correct. Anyway, running through our after takeoff checks, the auto brake is off, engine start switches are off, gear lever is in the off position, runway turn off lights are off, cabin lights are set as required, and that's the after takeoff checklist complete. For the climb out checks, we do have command A there on the MCP. Altimeters we can actually leave all the way up through the climb in theory, 2992, but we'll go standard still once we come through 18,000 feet. So just waiting now till we come up through 10,000, we can continue our acceleration. The aircraft should do that automatically. We'll get the landing lights off at that point as well. And you can see there on the nav display now, tracking in towards waypoint Zoo. After that we'll be tracking outbound towards the India Papa Lima VOR as discussed. And we do have an FMC message there, unable 280 knots at waypoint Judith. We'll be fine with that, so we'll clear that for the time being. Up through 9,000. We should have San Diego just off the left wing, and you can see the airfield there just out over the water. It says 10,000 feet. Autopilot automatically bringing us up to 287 knots for the climb. Landing lights can go off. And nice clear weather here, so we'll cycle the seatbelt signs.
Royal 716, contact Los Angeles Center on 128.6. Have a good day.
28.6, take care, sir, 716.
Obviously, our vertical speed there reducing as the aircraft accelerates. And so far, as you'd expect, the aircraft handling pretty flawlessly here in terms of the VNAV climb. Just come out on our nav display range. And we are already picking up the India Papa Lima VOR. We've got 86 miles to run there. You can see there as well, we're on about a bearing of 070 inbound currently.
Executive 648, contact Los Angeles Center 128.6. Good day.
128.6, good day, Executive 648.
We've still got the climb 2 derate, which we selected of course on the ground. And yeah, very much as you would expect so far from a PMDG aircraft, it seems to be doing everything that we would expect, which is great to see. As I said during the takeoff, the rudder did feel a tiny bit twitchy initially. That could just be my control settings, but overall once we got the aircraft going it felt pretty good. It is just a case in a real world jet of just putting in slight pressures on the rudder really to keep the aircraft straight. And in terms of hand flying, a little bit difficult to say here. I'm using a joystick as opposed to a yoke, but the aircraft felt pretty good overall. I know there are some real world 737 pilots out there that have made videos as well in the aircraft, so they're probably better placed to make a judgment on that, but again, to me the aircraft feels pretty good. The feeling on the controls had a reasonable amount of weight to it. And as I said, with the aircraft trimmed, it sat very nicely on the flight director as well, so pretty easy to hand fly. Coming up through 16,000 feet, so another 2,000 feet here will go standard on the altimeters. And you can see the high terrain that we discussed there during the brief, coming up overhead the top of the start of that at the moment. Again, it's up to around 10,000 feet. Otherwise though, rather a beautiful afternoon here on the west coast.
Departure United 715s with the other 1.2, we're climbing via the zoo.
So just keeping an eye on our altitude, getting ready to go into standard on the altimeters. There's 18,000. Got standard on the left, same on the right, and standard on the secondary there as well. Almost up through 20,000 feet, again above all of the weather. Nice conditions now, so seatbelt signs can go to auto. And we'll just come out again on the nav display range. There's India Papa Lima. Currently showing that we're going to be level around waypoint blue, so about 40 miles to run here to top of climb.
United 715, clear direct gritter and then on nav.
Directed gritter on nav, United 715.
Fairly slow climb speed there by the looks of things with the cost index at 20. Anyway, just coming up through 20,000 feet, we've obviously got the seatbelt signs off now, so the passengers hopefully starting to move around a little bit down the back. It's a fairly short sector for us, so as usual we'll head outside the aircraft whilst we have the opportunity here. And we'll take a look at the external model in a little bit more detail. We'll cruise our way over towards Phoenix, and as we're approaching top of descent, getting the aircraft set up for the arrival, we'll come back to the flight deck and take things from there.
Kona 225, you're at our contact, limit altimeter 29905, and you can proceed as requested. You cleared into the Bravo if you need it.
Okay, clear on valid 6,500, 225.
Flight ground 84, turn right heading 300, contact approach 119.6, good day.
300, 119.6, flight to anywhere.
Clarence, good afternoon, November 300, Hotel Lima IFR to Tucson.
15, let me know practice for you as they pass below in about 4 miles or so. Contact Los Angeles Center 128.6. Good day.
28.6, United 715, good day.
Departure, good afternoon. Mango West 692 Romeo, proceed as clear, passing now 2,300 feet.
Mango Best 692 Romeo SoCal, good afternoon. Your radar contact. Amend the altitude though. Climb and maintain. Flight level 210, 210.
Climb and maintain flight level 210, 210. Mango Best 692 Romeo.
Wind 711, slowly westbound.
Kona 225, you said moving westbound?
Wind 711.
Wind 711, thanks. Air Canada 1092, contact Los Angeles Center on 128.6. Have a good day.
28.6, we'll see Air Canada 1092.
So welcome back to the flight deck. As I said, very quick hop over towards Phoenix. We're just approaching our top of descent. We've got 6 miles to run, 5 miles now, so about another half a minute here. Plan for the descent, we're going to set 3,000 feet, that's the incept altitude for the ILS, and we're going to let the aircraft fly the entire descent in VNAV as much as possible, really just to test the system. We'll brief the arrival in just a moment's time, but the arrival into Phoenix should be a pretty good test for the PMDG 737. So we have 3,000 foot set on the altitude. We're still in VNAV for the time being, and we've got 2 miles now to run towards top of descent. So we'll just monitor the aircraft and make sure it does put us into the descent. And once we've got the aircraft going down, we'll start setting up for the arrival.
Major 933, radar contact 3 miles west of Scottsdale Airport, Phoenix altimeter 2980.
So there's top of descent. Thrust levers are coming off, and we have gone into descent. We have 3,000 on the PFD. As I said, plan there really, we're just going to leave the aircraft to do its thing. We'll see how it actually handles the arrival. There's plenty of restrictions on the way down. On that note, we can start briefing up the arrival. So we've been cleared for the Hydra 1 RNAV arrival in for the ILS-08 as we expected. It's plate 10-2 Hotel initially for the Star, it's an RNAV Star. Coming in from waypoint Hogs, we've got a 250 or above flight level restriction at Judith at 280 knots, so again we'll keep an eye on the aircraft to see that it manages that. We've got to be below flight level 220 at waypoint Romeo Kilo Delta Alpha Mike. And we've got another restriction at Hydra back at 265 knots, below flight level 190. And the same really throughout the entire approach. As you can see, we've got various speed and altitude restrictions. So we're just going to leave the aircraft in VNAV and we'll see how it copes. The star brings us in towards waypoint Jamil, and from Jamil we're going to be joining onto the ILS for runway 08. For the plate there it's 11-3, the frequency is 111.75, so we can tune that up on both sides.
Major 933, contact departure 119.2.
192, Major 933.
So we've got 111.75 on my side.
November 1 Charlie Mike, flighting 170, back to your final.
170 on the heading, be Shell 1 Charlie Mike.
And the same there on the first officer side. Final approach course is 078. So 078 on the left. And on the right. Aerodrome elevation is 1,135 feet. We've already discussed that and we've got that set as our landing altitude. The approach itself, it's a Cap 1 ILS minima. The DH is 1368. So we'll set that currently on Barrow, which is what we want.
November 519 Alpha Foxtrot. Contact approach 124.9.
It's going to take us a little bit of time there to work our way through to 1368.
24.9 Alpha Foxtrot.
Obviously with the high aerodrome elevation there we've got a high minima. The actual decision height is only 250 feet.
Approach Cherokee 519 Alpha Foxtrot at 4,500 east transition.
So first restriction, we've got to be above flight level 250 at Judith. Looks like we're going to be okay to make that for the time being.
Approach, roger. Aircraft requesting advisory taken.
So Barrow 1368, and we have the same on the first officer side. For the missed approach, it's climbing to 3,000 feet in a climbing left turn, up to ultimately 5,000 feet, heading 280 outbound to take up the hold. In terms of the terrain, there is high terrain on the arrival. The terrain relevant to us is out towards the west. There is some out towards the east as well. MSA for our sector is 5,800 feet. We will be creeping into the 6,200 foot sector MSA. We need to go around. Weather-wise, much the same as when we left San Diego really. Nice conditions, a little bit of light cloud around. Temperatures around 15 degrees, QNH is still 2992. As we said, planning to land on 08 left. So vacating, probably off on Bravo 8 or 9. We'll go with auto brake 2. And then we'll just make our way in towards Terminal 4. I'm not entirely sure which terminal Southwest used in the real world. Alternate is Kilo Papa Romeo Charlie. We need 2.2 tons for the diversion. Showing arriving with 3.6, so about an extra 1.4. That's about an extra 30-40 minutes of fuel up our sleeve. We planned on 20, so we've saved a little bit somewhere along the way. That just about covers the brief. Just coming up over waypoint Judith, and we're still above flight level 250 as you can see. In terms of speed restrictions, we should be 280 or below at Judith. Obviously we're well below that already with our managed speed there at cost index 20. Next speed restriction is going to be 265 knots at waypoint Hydra. Unable 265 at Hydra according to the aircraft. We'll leave that for the time being. We can intervene later on if we need to do so. We're already back below 265, so that's obviously a bit of an erroneous message there. Anyway, we'll run through our descent checks. So ATIS has been received, altimeters, we'll set those later on, but again it's basically standard QNH anyway, 2992. Radios are set, MCP altitude has been set, we've got 3,000 feet. FMC speed, so we'll come back to init ref. For the approach it's going to be flaps 30. And we do have 111.75078. That's giving us a VREF of 131. So FMC approach speed has been set, localizer frequency is set on both sides, localizer course again set on both sides. For the descent itself, anti-ice not required for the time being, landing altitude is set, recall is normal, barrier minima has been set on both sides, auto brake we have auto brake 2. And now just waiting until we pass through transition altitude, and then we'll set the altimeters.
an assigned heading of 340.
Sky 35 Bravo Charlie, Pink departure right deck. Climb maintain 6000, Pink altimeter 2980.
Climb maintain 6000, 5 Bravo Charlie.
November 1 Charlie Mike, traffic 11 o'clock and 4 miles eastbound, 4,500 indicated, connect Scottsdale Tower, 119.9.
That tower beach, show 1 Charlie Mike.
Air 5 Bravo Charlie, identify observed by deck. Climb maintain 7000.
Climb maintain 7000, 5 Bravo Charlie.
Okay, so we're just coming up on 11,000 feet. We've got the seatbelt signs on now. We set the altimeters to a QNH of 2992. The aircraft wants us back at 230 knots now for the next speed restriction. And you can see there we do have an FMC message that drag is required, so we'll take a little bit of speed brake there just to help bring our speed back. So far though, it's done a pretty flawless job actually of flying the approach in terms of its VNAV profile. And it's just a case of the fact that the profile is designed such that the aircraft can't quite handle that at idle power. You can see now with some speed brake the speed is rolling back. So it seems that in the Boeing the aircraft does prioritise the profile over the speed.
We're 20747, radar contact 17 miles southeast of Willie Airport, Willie Vortac. Verify your altitude and ATIS Papa.
Down through 10,000 feet, we're below 250 knots, landing lights can go on. I'm running through the rest of our descent checks, so the altimeters are set, speed, we are below 250 knots, landing lights are on, we'll just cycle the passenger signs.
4000 and we have Papa, Sky 0747.
And looking good now on our speed, maintaining 230 knots. Next restriction, at or above 8,000. Can't quite make out the below there, looks like 9,000 with the decel waypoint, just coming through 9,000 now. We'll get rid of the speed brake again for the time being.
We're 747, 9 miles from Snow, turn left heading 330, maintain 4,000 until established on localizer, cleared ILS, runway 30 center approach.
So established and clear for the ILS localizer 30 center to make the gateway, Sky 0747.
Did just try using my control binding there for the speed brake, didn't seem to want to activate, so it may be that it's a different binding on the PMDG 737 as opposed to the default controls in the sim. And the aircraft now wanting to bring the speed back towards 210 knots for the next restriction. Once again, drag is required, we'll clear the message and we'll extend the speed brake.
Central aircraft, hazardous weather information airments for turbulence, strong surface winds, low level wind shear advisories for Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah. About for the next 5 hours, available on flight service frequencies.
Again, as I said, the aircraft has met every single restriction on the way down so far, minus the speed, and again that's just a question of drag. We've had VNAV in for the entirety of the flight, so the PMDG 737 doing a really excellent job so far in terms of VNAV, which does tend to be iffy in many sims at the best of times, and certainly within most aircraft within Microsoft Flight Simulator. So down through 7,000, needs to be about 21 miles to run. And showing exactly 21 there currently. Speed's looking good. Doesn't look like we're picking up the ILS DME just yet, but we should get that very shortly. Got about 20 miles now to run towards the field. Just coming on the range on the nav display. We'll start configuring as well for the approach, so we'll take flaps 5.
Phoenix approach 9242 Hotel, just departed Chandler, 1700 climbing.
925 Alpha Zulu, Phoenix approach, say type aircraft and request.
And speed now rolling back to 180 knots. Again, we'll just take a little bit more speed brake here, just to help get the speed back. Okay, so we're nicely established on the RLS, just coming up through 6 miles, we've got the gear down, we'll arm up the speed brake. Speed can come back to VREF, which we said was 130 knots. So a VREF set, we'll select flaps 30 for the landing. And start selectors can go to continuous. Runway turn off lights can go on. Running through the landing checks, go around altitude, we have 3,000 foot set. Runway turn off lights are on. Landing gear is down 3 greens. Flaps, we have 30 selected and indicated. Autopilot will leave in for now. Auto thrust will do the same. Engine start switches are set to continuous, and that's our landing checklist complete. So just coming back towards VREF. And just approaching 1,000 feet above aerodrome elevation.
1,000.
That's checked. We are stable.
Report to Hotel, radar contact 3 Southwest Chandler, Phoenix altimeter 2980, verify requested final altitude.
So we'll disconnect the autopilot.
Actually, 6,500, 42 Hotel.
Aircraft wanting to just dip the nose down there as we did so. Trimmed out nicely now, just following the flight directives.
X-ray Sierra Mike 36, Phoenix approach you on.
Again, overall the aircraft feels pretty good hand fly.
Phoenix departure, Aspire 36, 4,000, 120 on the heading, and we have Zulu.
500.
Let's check 500.
400.
Sure, radar contact, expect visual approach runway 19 at Glendale, climb maintain 6,000.
We'll take out the auto throttle.
Minimums.
Okay, as minimums, we'll continue.
200. 100. 50. 40. 30. 20.
So cutting the throttles.
10.
Landed slightly long there. Let's touch down. We'll go idle reverse. And just lowering the nose onto the runway. Letting the auto brake do its thing for the time being, we'll take the second right exit. And coming onto the brakes. As I say, we'll vacate off to the right and make our way in towards the terminal. You have to forgive my slight mishmash of traffic at the moment with AIG. So all clear on the right. Get the landing lights off. Taxi light can go on. Just wait until we've made the turn to carry out the after landing checks. Flaps can come up.
704 visual brake. Southwest 704 Phoenix Tower, runway 8, clear to land, wind calm, following the Pilatus, 2 mile final. Land late, 7704.
And we'll get the position and strobe lights just back to steady. Fairly short taxi, we'll just be making our own way in towards the base, so we'll get the APU fired up. And again, unfortunately that binding there not working on my hardware for the speed brake, so just having to move that manually. And you can see it's quite slow there in terms of motion, so it's going to take us a little while to retract. So in the meantime, we'll just keep a good eye out for a spare bay. Try and pull onto a gate. Looks like there's one just off to the left of the EasyJet, so we'll take that. APU is spooling up.
Tower Southwest 2179, runway 8.
And the speed brake is retracted. So we'll take the gate here just off tar 10 o'clock.
Tower Skyway 6311, runway 8.
Can't really see much of a lead in line there, but it looks like we do have one. Just wait until we've got the aircraft onto the bay to run the aft landing checks. We'll get rid of the runway turn off and the taxi lights.
Skyway 6311, Phoenix Tower, runway 8, clear to land, wind calm.
Clear to land, runway 8, Skyway 6311.
And bring the aircraft to a stop. Park brake can go on. Running through the after landing checks then, transponder is set to standby, flaps are retracted, speed brake is down, landing lights are off, strobe lights are off, taxi lights are off, anti-ice is off, APU is running, we'll take that onto the bus now. And similarly we'll get the APU bleed on, engine bleeds can come off. Preheats are off, engine start switches are off, auto brake is off, and that's the aft landing checks complete. Running through the shutdown checks, parking brake is set. Again, we do have the APU on the bus with the bleed air, so we'll cut the fuel to the engines. And good run down there on 1.
75762, roll down to Bravo 11.
Bravo 11.
And same there on the number 2. So the signs can go off. Anti-collision light can go off. We've got the elec, anti-ice and overhead cautions there, hydraulics as well. Expecting to see all of those come online obviously as we lose the engines. So the anti-collision light is off, APU bleeder is on, fuel pumps are off, again just leaving the left aft there for the APU. Anti-ice is off, electrical hydraulic pumps can go off, isolation valve can go to the open position. Flight directors are off, electrical power we have established, exterior lights are set, and we'll get the doors opened up fairly shortly. So there you go guys, we've safely made it onto stand here at Phoenix's Sky Harbor Airport, and as I think you'll have seen for yourselves throughout the flight, overall the PMDG 737 doesn't disappoint. Again though, as usual there are a few other areas I want to touch on before we close up the review. We'll first take a slightly closer look at some of the modelling and texturing, both externally and internally. We're also going to take a look at some of the additional features that come with the product. The 737 is a very comprehensive offering from PMDG, and it does have some additional features that really elevate it above your average sim aircraft. In a similar vein, we'll run through a very quick failure scenario just to give you a feel for that. And then, as I say, we'll cap off the review. I'll give you a breakdown on what I think of the 737, and give you some pros and cons to think about should you be wishing to purchase the aircraft. So as far as the external model of the aircraft goes, I think we had a pretty good chance to look at that throughout the flight, but we will just touch on a couple of details. Once again, as usual from PMDG, overall I would say that the external modelling is a very nice effort. It is one of those add-ons where from a distance everything looks pretty much perfect. There are a few details we can pick apart, and we'll look at some of those areas in just a moment's time. But certainly from a distance the aircraft does look very realistic, and it fits in rather well aesthetically as well with the sim. You may have noticed with some of our previous external shots you get a whole host of custom ground equipment with the aircraft, which is a really nice touch from PMDG. For example, here we've got the potable water truck and the catering van on the rear right exit. But there are also a whole host of other ground vehicles that we can call to the aircraft. For example, we can also have a ground power unit, we've seen the air stairs already, you can call up a passenger bus, a maintenance van. So the modelling for the most part is great, the same goes for the texturing. Overall the aircraft is textured very nicely. You do get a pretty decent selection of liveries as well with the aircraft, and I gather that more are on the way. Either way, I have no doubt once the product is released we're going to see a whole slew of various liveries available on various websites. Again though, as you can see here, on the areas of the aircraft that you're generally going to be looking at, everything is textured very nicely, very crisp, very clear. Detailing is good, and I would say that overall the PBR effect looks pretty nice as well. For sure though, there are areas of the external model where concessions have been made. Again, I presume this is done in an effort to save on FPS. The wheel wells of the aircraft are certainly an area where there's less fidelity in terms of visual modelling. For example, here up at the nose gear there is enough there to make things look convincing, but it's fairly spartan inside the wheel well itself. And similarly, one area that did catch my eye, if we look through into the cockpit from the outside, you can see there pretty basic panelling textures. I was a little bit surprised by that. Again, I assume it's an FPS saving exercise, but it would be nice to have a slightly higher resolution texture there nonetheless. But again, overall, as you've seen for yourselves, the aircraft does generally look great from the outside, particularly when it's in flight and you're not looking at things too closely. And certainly most of the areas where I was able to find lower resolution textures or areas with slightly less modelling detail, again, they are going to be areas of the aircraft that generally you're not going to be looking at throughout the flight. Into the cockpit then, and again a very nice effort from PMDG. Graphically it isn't the very best cockpit that I've seen in the sim, but of course it is right up there. And of course the systems depth is really what we're all after with a PMDG aircraft, and the aircraft certainly delivers on that front. The modelling detail is excellent throughout the cockpit, as you'll have seen during our flight. The textures are generally very good as well, although again I would say they fall just shy of some of the best add-ons that we've seen in the sim to date. The main reason that I say that, for me, some of the materials in the cockpit don't quite look true to life. There are certain details that look absolutely exquisite, for example the throttles and the engine fire handles, they both look completely realistic. I'll show you a couple of examples in just a moment's time what I mean regarding the materials. One last minor gripe for me, I would say that the panel colouring has a slightly more purplish hue to it than what it appears to be on the real world aircraft. So just a couple of examples here in terms of the PBR materials texturing that I discussed previously. Here you can see on the yoke, for example, it's by no means bad, but it doesn't quite look true to life. And as I say, there are a few areas throughout the cockpit where I feel that's the case. But I am obviously getting pretty picky here, it's still an excellent cockpit without a doubt. And really the only reason I even bring it up is obviously standards within Microsoft Flight Simulator these days are incredibly high when it comes to visual modelling and detailing. One of the really nice features with PMDG aircraft, and the 737 is no exception, you do get a significant amount of customization with the product. Each aircraft will actually come configured based on the real-world airline options, I believe. Nevertheless, if you do want to adjust things for yourselves, it's easily done via the CDU. The two most noticeable options there really are the MCP, or the autopilot panel, and also the standby instruments. We can switch between both the Honeywell and the Collins unit on the MCP. We can also switch between analog and digital standby instruments. The other more major visual change that we can make in the cockpit, we can choose to go with the more modern standard window layout, or we can choose to have the more old-fashioned eyebrow windows up over the main windshield. As I say, we do get a ton of customization options on the aircraft, so we'll take a look at those now, at least briefly. So heading down to the CDU, you can see firstly we have the aircraft setup. We have a whole host of options there in terms of equipment. We've already discussed the autopilot options there. You can see we can configure various EGPWS options. Overall 15 pages of various options that we can adjust on the aircraft. We've got ETOPS options, FMS options, fuel options as well. And lastly we can change out the instruments and various equipment on the aircraft. So again, a very comprehensive range of options there in terms of the aircraft setup. Same goes with the displays. We can choose to change various display parameters on the aircraft. Again, 9 pages of options there, looking through the PFD, the EFIS and map display, the ND as well. We can change the engine displays. Failures, the aircraft does come with a comprehensive failure system, as well as maintenance functionality. We'll take a look at that in just a moment's time, very briefly. You can choose whether or not to select random failures. You can also select a specific system and fail the system within a given time frame. Slightly disappointing there, time frame was the only option in terms of programming a failure. I was hoping, for example, we might be able to simulate a V1 cut on the engine or have a failure going through a certain altitude, things of that nature. In terms of options, we have simulation, performance and colour options. For the simulation there, it's basically just different settings on the aircraft, for example, having all three altimeters in the aircraft sync up. Various callouts as well. And for example, we can choose to pause the top of descent, we can choose the maximum amount of time acceleration the aircraft will accept. In terms of FS actions, this is where we access most of what we would currently do in the sim otherwise, so we can set up fuel and load, for example. We can set our passenger count. We can open the aircraft doors. We can actually use the pushback feature via the CDU as opposed to having to use the default pushback. And in terms of ground services, we've discussed already, but there are a whole slew of various ground vehicles and equipment that you can bring onto the aircraft. Lastly, in terms of ground maintenance, we've discussed failures already. You can fix up said failures using the ground maintenance system. So again, a very brief overview of the CDU options there, but as you can see for yourselves, the product does come with a ton of extra functionality above and beyond most of the competition currently available in the sim. Lastly, just a quick look at the night lighting, and overall the night lighting within the cockpit is very nice. There's certainly plenty of options in terms of configuration. The switch and gauge lighting is great. I will say that the main panel lighting there I find is a little bit uniform in terms of how it looks. But the cockpit night lighting is certainly very functional, and overall I think it creates a nice ambience. So lastly, just a very quick look at a failure scenario. This certainly isn't designed as any sort of a tutorial, we're just going to briefly look at a failure. We programmed in an engine failure 1 minute after takeoff. We just come up to 40% on the M1, we'll hit toga. And you can see we have N1 and toga there on the FMA. So again, we have an engine 2 failure. You can see they're programmed down on the right hand side CDU. We've got that armed up for a 1 minute failure.
80 knots.
Just coming up through 80 knots. There's throttle hold. So far so good in terms of engine parameters, everything looking quite normal. We're expecting an engine fire. There's V1 and rotate, so coming back on the yoke. And there's positive climb. We'll get the gear up. So climbing away, doing about 160 knots. There's an overheat detection on the master caution. We'll go Command A, get the autopilot in straight away, cancel the fire warning bell. We'll cancel the caution there as well. VNAV can go in. So we'll get the autopilot flying the aircraft, confirming it is number 2 with the fire, so we'll pull the engine fire handle and discharge the first fire bottle into the engine. So again, by no means a tutorial, but you can get a little bit of a feel for the failure system there, and it's certainly one of the areas of the product that really elevates the PMDG 737 above most other offerings for the sim. So there you go guys, that covers what I have to show you here today with the PMDG 737-700. Unsurprisingly, once again the aircraft is a really excellent effort from PMDG. PMDG's reputation is no accident. They've obviously worked very hard for many years now to bring us some really high quality products, and I would say that the NG here is no exception. Nonetheless, I am going to try and break down the product into some positives and negatives for you, just to try and give you some food for thought in terms of your purchasing decision. As usual, we'll start with the negatives, work our way through to the positives. Straight off the bat, I will say that most of my negatives with the product are fairly minor in nature. And certainly if you are looking for a modern, high-fidelity study-level jet within Microsoft Flight Simulator, then the PMDG 737 is certainly delivering on what most of us were hoping we'd get in the sim with the aircraft. Starting with the flight model, the only two issues I noticed there really. Firstly, during the takeoff, the aircraft, as I said, initially quite sensitive on the rudder. I suspect that's as a result of having the option enabled whereby the rudder operates both the rudder itself as well as the nose wheel steering. But of course in the sim, as I was effectively using the tiller initially, you would expect the steering to be a little bit more sensitive. And as I said, once the speed built up, that tended to clear up quite nicely. And overall the aircraft felt pretty good during the takeoff. The other point that I would make, and I wouldn't necessarily say it's a negative, again I have no experience really with the real world 737. I will say though that the 737 did seem to be a little bit more sprightly on the controls than I was expecting. During the departure it felt really good, it was nice to hand fly, as I said, very stable, very easy to trim. The control forces felt about right to me during the rotation and during the initial climb there. I did find though that flying the ILS the aircraft felt fairly sensitive in pitch, and again that may be true to life of the real world 737. The aircraft certainly has one of the better flight models that I've seen from any commercial jet in the sim to date. But for me, I think that Microsoft Flight Simulator perhaps still has a couple of limitations when it comes to the flight modelling. and generally speaking I find X-Plane tends to feel a little bit more true to life. In terms of the modelling and texturing, we've talked about that quite a bit already. For the most part the aircraft looks excellent. Just a couple of areas where that does fall slightly shy, and they're generally areas that wouldn't bother me personally, but I know they do bother some of you. The cabin detailing was fairly basic, but personally I'm fine with that if it saves on some FPS. And similarly, looking at the external model as we did, we saw that there are a few areas that do lack in a little bit of detail, but again they are areas that generally you're not going to be looking at unless you make a concerted effort. Texturing of the aircraft, again overall very nice. There were a couple of cockpit texture issues that we talked about. Not even issues necessarily, but personal preferences. I thought some of the materials there could look a little bit more lifelike. Again, for the most part the cockpit is excellent, but I have seen better offerings from other add-on developers when it comes to the purely graphical aspect of the aircraft. A couple of very minor systems details as opposed to issues really. Firstly, the speed brake. As I mentioned, my default key assigned there didn't work with the speed brake. It may be that PMDG have assigned a different key function for the speed brake operation. Not a big deal, but a slight inconvenience there. And overall the operation of the speed brake is incredibly slow. You don't seem to be able to click and drag. I would suggest that they make that an option, otherwise it's quite laborious and quite time consuming to actually operate the speed brake. Lastly, just a brief mention on the weather radar. I said we'd discuss that. Currently the aircraft doesn't have a functioning weather radar. This is a decision that most developers are choosing to make at the moment, until Asobo have addressed the SDK issues. Just be aware of it for now, but PMDG will undoubtedly fix up the weather radar once the SDK functionality is there. And my last negative with the product, I did have one crash to desktop when trying to enact a failure scenario. It was actually whilst trying to record that engine failure scenario that you saw in the video. As soon as the failure activated, it did cause the sim to crash to desktop, but as I say, that did seem to be a one-off. It didn't happen thereafter. And that was after flying the aircraft for a good couple of hours and having reset the scenario and various other aspects of the sim on multiple occasions. So overall I think the aircraft is pretty rock steady, but again I thought it was worthy of mention. Anyway, that just about covers us in terms of my negatives. Overall pretty minor details there. There are certainly things that could be done better on the product, but of course nevertheless we are talking about one of the very best products in the sim to date. Just touching on the aircraft's FPS before we move on to the positives. Overall there I have to say I was actually very pleasantly surprised. I was getting about 60 FPS in the 737 versus about 78 in the default Cessna 152, so only losing about 18 frames between this and a default aircraft. Pretty amazing overall, given the graphical fidelity and of course the systems fidelity. Anyway, moving on to my positives, and really my positives cover everything that makes a PMDG aircraft a PMDG aircraft. The systems fidelity is pretty much second to none. Again, I'm not a 737 driver, but I couldn't really find anything to fault there. Everything seemed to behave as it should, at least as far as I could tell, and in terms of the automation as well, pretty flawless. We flew pretty much the entire profile of our flight there in VNAV, and the aircraft didn't put a foot wrong. Not only did it meet all of the constraints, at least within its ability to do so, but it also flew very smoothly, very accurately for the most part. It didn't overshoot any of the turns. One point I would make there actually in terms of navigation, the aircraft flew the ILS very nicely, which again isn't always the case with other aircraft in the sim. I did however try carrying out an auto land, and whilst the aircraft did get us down on the runway, it was a little bit squirrely in the process. But yes, systems fidelity, second to none I would say, a very high fidelity aircraft. Of course we can definitely call this one study level. Not only of course do we have the accurate systems, but we also have the failure modelling, and that really goes to elevate the whole experience, make the aircraft well and truly something that you can study with. I really like the fact as well that we have both random failures as well as programmable failures. Although, as I said, it would have been nice to have a few more options in terms of how we actually program those failures. As far as I could tell, it was only a time-based functionality. Flight model, generally good. We touched on a couple of points previously, but for the most part, again, one of the best jets in the sim without a doubt. I would say very much on a par with the MD-80 there, really, in terms of the flight modelling. Definitely more sensitive on the controls than the MD-80, but of course that's to be expected. Again, though, just slightly more sensitive than I was expecting from the 737. Sounds for the most part were excellent, very immersive in the cockpit, and pretty decent sounds outside as well. The engines were lacking a little bit of roar, but that generally seems to be the case in Microsoft Flight Simulator. There's not really any aircraft I can think of that really do jet engines full justification. But as I say, the sounds are really nice overall. The aircraft did feel very immersive as a result, and there's really not too much one can fault there overall. The ground surfaces were a nice touch, not something I'll probably use all that much myself, although they do make for some nice screenshots. And again, it does just go to increase the immersion in the sim that little bit more. It's also nice that you can run things in real time, so for example, call the fuel truck over, he'll come fuel the aircraft up. The panel state options were great as well. You can set various panel states, so you don't have to run the aircraft from a full cold and dark start on each occasion. Going through the full startup is certainly very much something that I enjoy, and I suspect if you're looking to purchase a PMDG aircraft, you're probably the same as well. But if you do want to get the aircraft up in the air post-haste, then again there is the option to do so. Anyway, ladies and gents, I think that more or less covers what we have to talk about here today. I think the easiest way to summarise is obviously there was a ton of anticipation for the PMDG 737 coming into the sim, and for the most part I'm fairly sure that the add-on is totally going to live up to your expectations. A very high fidelity, high quality, study level modern jet that we now have available in the sim. The PMDG 737 is an aircraft that does exactly what it purports to do, and I think that PMDG's newest aircraft really ushers in a new age within Microsoft Flight Simulator. Anyway guys, once again I do hope you enjoyed the video and found it to be of use. If you did, please consider giving it a like. If you want to see more content like this from the channel, then please consider subscribing as well. As ever, a very big thank you to my channel members and patrons for all of your support, it's hugely appreciated. And a very big thank you as well to PMDG for letting us take a look at the aircraft. As always guys, I hope all of you are having a great day wherever you are. Take really good care, and I will see you all again soon.